This is the story of Lee Marvin, the Hollywood actor who won an Academy Award after nearly dying on a Pacific island at age 20. Before he became famous for tough guy roles in films like The Dirty Dozen and Cat Ballou, Marvin was a private first class in the United States Marine Corps, fighting one of World War II's bloodiest battles. June 18, 1944. A Japanese machine gun tore through Marvin's unit on Mount Tapo during the Battle of Saipan, the bullet severing his sciatic nerve and nearly ending his life right there. 13 months of recovery followed, testing everything he had left. This is the story of how a young Marine survived one of the Pacific War's most brutal battles, and what it cost him to build a life after. Lee Marvin came into the world on February 19, 1924 in New York City. His father was an advertising executive, his mother a fashion writer and beauty editor. The family had money, connections, and a comfortable life in Manhattan. Marvin grew up in that world, attending private schools, living the kind of childhood that should have led to college and a white-collar career. But Marvin wasn't built for that life. He got kicked out of dozens of schools, couldn't sit still in classrooms, constantly getting into trouble. By the time he was a teenager, his parents had run out of options. They sent him to St. Leo College Preparatory School in Florida, hoping the structure and discipline would straighten him out. December 7, 1941 changed everything. Pearl Harbor. America entered the war, and suddenly young men across the country were lining up to enlist. Marvin was 17, still in school, watching his classmates leave to join the fight. He didn't wait long. On August 12, 1942, just months after turning 18, Lee Marvin walked into a Marine Corps recruitment office and signed up. No hesitation, no second thoughts. America had been at war for 8 months by then. The offices flooded with young men ready to fight, and Marvin added his name to the list. The Marines took him in and broke him down the way they broke down every recruit. Boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina, months of physical training, weapons drills, learning to follow orders, transforming civilians into Marines. For someone who'd spent his teenage years fighting authority, the discipline should have been impossible. Instead, something clicked. The structure he'd rejected in school made sense in the Corps. After training wrapped up, the Corps stuck him in I Company, 3rd Battalion, 24th Marines, which was part of the 4th Marine Division. Scout Sniper, that was his assignment, about as dangerous as jobs get in the Pacific. Scout Snipers moved ahead of main forces, gathering intel, identifying enemy positions, taking out key targets. Usually the first to meet the enemy, highest casualty rates of any role in the infantry. Think about what that job actually meant. You're out front, alone or with one other Marine, moving through enemy territory before the rest of your unit arrives. Every bush could be hiding a Japanese soldier. Every cave could have a machine gun nest. One wrong step, one moment of bad luck, and you're dead before anyone even knows you're in trouble. 1942 through 1944, Marvin deployed to the Pacific for the island-hopping campaign. The strategy was brutal but necessary. Take one island, establish a base, use it to hit the next island. Get closer and closer to Japan itself. Each island meant dense jungle, fortified positions everywhere, an enemy that had sworn to fight to the death rather than surrender. Brutal doesn't begin to cover what that kind of warfare looked like. Marvin saw combat on multiple islands during this period. ROI no more in the Marshall Islands, January and February of 1944. That was the 4th Marine Division's first major combat operation. The fighting was intense, the Marines learning hard lessons about how the Japanese defended these small Pacific islands. Marvin made it through without a scratch. But every island, every battle, you're rolling the dice again. Sooner or later, the odds catch up. June 1944 rolled around. The war had hit a turning point, and American forces needed something they didn't have yet, a base within bomber range of Japan's home islands. Everything up to this point had been positioning, getting close enough to make the final push. Saipan was the answer. This small island in the Marianas sat 1,500 miles from Tokyo. Close enough, the B-29 superfortress could make that trip, drop its bombs, and get back. But first, the island had to be taken, and the Japanese knew exactly how valuable Saipan was. They'd spent months, maybe years, turning it into a fortress. Operation Forager launched on June 15, 1944. The Navy's Fifth Fleet showed up with hundreds of ships, throwing 71,000 American troops at the beaches. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions hit the water first, the Army's 27th Infantry Division following behind. The defenders waiting for them numbered 31,000 Japanese soldiers who'd spent months converting the island into a maze of caves and bunkers and hidden artillery positions. The first day was chaos. Marines hitting the beaches under fire, trying to establish a foothold, while Japanese artillery tore through the landing zones. Men died in the water before they even reached sand. Others made it to the beach only to get cut down, pushing inland. But the Marines kept coming, wave after wave, and by nightfall on June 15th, they'd secured enough beach to start moving equipment and supplies ashore. The plan looked straightforward enough on paper. Take the beaches, push inland, grab the high ground, cut the island in half, then systematically clear out Japanese resistance. Reality had other ideas. The Japanese had built their defenses perfectly, using every natural advantage the island offered. Caves that could hide dozens of soldiers, ridgelines that gave clear firing positions on American advances, artillery positions that could hit the beaches from miles inland. And then there was Mount Tapo. At 1,554 feet, it was the island's highest point, sitting almost dead center. The Japanese had turned it into their primary stronghold, fortifying the slopes with bunkers and machine gun nests and artillery positions. From up there, they could see and hit American positions across almost the entire southern half of the island. Everyone knew what taking that mountain would cost. The Marines would have to fight uphill against an enemy that had spent months preparing for exactly this attack. No cover, no easy approaches, just straight combat against fortified positions. But there was no way around it. Mount Tapo had to fall, or the entire operation would stall. June 18th arrived, 3 days after the initial landing. American forces had pushed inland from the beaches, taking heavy casualties every step, and now they were moving toward Mount Tapo. The 4th Marine Division, Marvin's unit, was part of the assault force tasked with taking the mountain. The terrain was hell. Volcanic rock, dense vegetation, ridges and ravines that channeled Marines into kill zones. Japanese troops worked the ground like they owned it, hiding in caves and spider holes, waiting for Marines to walk past before opening fire from behind. You couldn't see them until they started shooting, and by then, men were already dying. Marvin's unit was moving through the area that day, probably part of a larger advance toward the mountain's slopes. Scout snipers would have been out front trying to identify Japanese positions before the main force ran into them. Dangerous work was made more dangerous by how well the Japanese had camouflaged their defensive positions. Machine guns erupted, multiple positions opening up at once, catching the Marines in a crossfire. Chaos in seconds. Bullets snapping through air, ricocheting off rocks. Men diving for whatever cover they could find, shouting, trying to locate where the fire was coming from. The sound alone was overwhelming. Machine gun fire echoing off the volcanic rock, making it impossible to tell how many guns you were facing or where they were positioned. The round that found Marvin struck his lower back. Later reports said it severed the sciatic nerve, the largest nerve running through your body from lower back down through both legs. That nerve controls movement and sensation in your legs. When it gets cut, the pain is beyond description, immediate and total. Your legs stop working, you go down, and you're not getting back up without help. Most of the men in his immediate unit died around him as the machine gun fire continued. Exact numbers are hard to pin down because these kinds of small unit actions often didn't get documented in detail. But the casualties were catastrophic. Men Marvin had trained with and fought alongside and trusted, with his life dying all around him while he lay there unable to move. Navy corpsmen pushed through the fire to reach wounded Marines. These were some of the bravest men in the Pacific War, running into enemy fire unarmed to drag wounded Marines to safety and patch them up right there in the middle of combat. Often the only reason wounded Marines survived was because a corpsman got to them in time, stopped the bleeding, kept them alive long enough to get evacuated. Marvin got stabilized. Field medicine, morphine for the pain, bandages to control the bleeding. Then came the dangerous part, getting him off the battlefield, carrying a wounded Marine under fire, moving him back through terrain that was still being contested. Getting him to a collection point where he could be loaded onto a vehicle, or a stretcher team could take him further back. He made it to a field hospital on Saipan, probably one of the aid stations the Navy Medical Corps had set up near the beaches. Doctors there did what they could, but his wound was beyond their capabilities. severed nerve, massive tissue damage, risk of infection. He needed surgery, real facilities, time to stabilize. They loaded him onto a hospital ship, one of the converted transports the Navy used to evacuate serious casualties back to Hawaii or the mainland. The battle kept going without him. Days of fighting for Mount Tapo, Marines attacking the slopes under fire, gaining ground in yards measured in bodies. The Japanese defenders fought exactly the way they'd fought on every island. No retreat, no surrender, fighting until they were killed. Some positions had to be taken 3 or 4 times because Japanese soldiers would hide in caves during American attacks. Then emerge and retake the position after the Marines moved on. The entire Battle of Saipan ran until July 9th, nearly a month start to finish. The butcher's bill came due when it was over. 3,426 Americans dead. Over 10,000 wounded. The Marines took the heaviest casualties, which made sense since they'd done most of the fighting. Of the 31,000 Japanese troops defending the island, roughly 29,000 died. Only about 1,000 surrendered, which was unusual. Most Japanese soldiers chose death over capture. And then there were the civilians. Thousands of Japanese civilians had been living on Saipan, and when the battle turned against the Japanese military, something horrible happened at the northern cliffs. Places that would later be named Suicide Cliff and Bonsai Cliff became sites of mass death. Civilians jumped rather than face capture, convinced by Japanese propaganda that American forces would torture and kill them. Entire families went over the cliffs together. Marines and sailors watched it happen, tried to stop it, called out in Japanese that they wouldn't be harmed. Most jumped anyway. Saipan was a victory, but the cost made it feel like something else entirely. The war ended for Lee Marvin on June 18th, but a different kind of fight started that same day. Naval hospitals became his entire world for the next 13 months. First stop was probably a facility in Hawaii. Pearl Harbor, most likely, where they had the surgical capabilities to deal with serious casualties. Later, he would have been transferred stateside, maybe to a naval hospital in California, as his conditions stabilized enough to allow for the journey. His sciatic nerve was severed. The doctors could repair the tissue damage, clean out the wound, and prevent infection. But nerve repair in 1944 was primitive at best. The nerve was gone, and that meant the signals from his brain couldn't reach his legs properly. Walking wasn't possible, and doctors had serious doubts he'd ever manage it again. Think about what that meant for a 20-year-old. He'd been in peak physical condition, trained to move fast and quiet, trusted with one of the most physically demanding jobs in the Corps. Now he couldn't stand without help, couldn't take a single step, faced the very real possibility that he'd spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair or on crutches. The psychological impact was probably worse than the physical pain. Plenty of guys came back from the war missing limbs, blind, paralyzed. They learned to live with it because they had no choice. But the adjustment period was brutal, watching your entire future change in an instant. Knowing the life you'd planned was gone. Rehab in 1944 meant no advanced nerve repair techniques, no sophisticated therapy equipment, no modern understanding of neuroplasticity. Just pain and repetition and refusing to quit. Physical therapists would work with him every day, trying to get his muscles responding, building strength in what still worked. Teaching him to compensate for what was gone. Every single day, working to force his body to move again, despite the destroyed nerve. Maybe starting with just trying to feel his toes, trying to get any sensation or movement at all. Then trying to shift weight, to balance, to support himself standing. Each tiny victory measured in inches of progress, followed by setbacks and plateaus where nothing seemed to improve. 13 months, hospital beds and rehab sessions and other wounded Marines going through their own recovery. Some guys got better and shipped out. Some guys didn't improve and got sent home disabled. Marvin was somewhere in between, making progress so slow you could barely see it day to day, but looking back over weeks and months, he was moving forward. The human body is strange. Nerves don't really heal once they're severed, not completely. But sometimes the body finds workarounds, other neural pathways that can compensate. Muscles that can take over functions they weren't originally meant to handle. Slowly, impossibly, Marvin learned to walk again. Not normal walking. A limp stayed with him for the rest of his life, though it was subtle enough that most people missed it unless they knew to look. His right leg never quite worked the way it had before, the nerve damage permanent. He'd deal with pain from that injury for decades, complications from the scar tissue, problems with circulation and sensation. But he could walk, which was more than the doctors had expected. The Marine Corps discharged Lee Marvin on July 24, 1945, honorably with a Purple Heart for wounds received in action. His division received the Navy Presidential Unit Citation for their performance on Saipan, recognizing the 4th Marine Division's sacrifice and effectiveness during the battle. He also got the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, with battle stars marking the campaigns he'd participated in, and the World War II Victory Medal that every service member received. 21 years old when he walked out of the hospital, 2 years of his life gone to the war, nearly killed, carrying scars both visible and invisible that would never fully heal. Now he had to figure out what came next, how to be a civilian again, what to do with the rest of his life. What Lee Marvin did next is remarkable, not because fame followed, but because he found any way forward at all. Combat veterans had it worse than other returning soldiers. They'd seen things that didn't translate to normal life. Sleep problems, anger issues, difficulty connecting. What we'd now recognize as PTSD, though in 1945, they just called it being Marvin fit that pattern. He drank heavily after the war, bounced between odd jobs, tried to find something that mattered after combat. Nothing measured up. Somewhere between 1948 and 1949, acting entered the picture. He started getting small parts in New York theater productions, learning the craft. Turns out he had talent not because he was naturally gifted, but because his combat experience shaped every role. The authenticity bled through in ways audiences noticed. His first film work came in the early 50s. Directors noticed something immediately. His military bearing wasn't an act. When he held a rifle, he held it like someone who'd actually used one in combat. When he played soldiers, there was weight from real experience. The roles got bigger. By the mid-50s, he was getting regular work in Hollywood, often playing heavies and villains. The Bad Seed in 1956. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance in 1962. The Killers in 1964. Cat Ballou in 1965 showed his range of comedy western that became a massive hit. His performance won him the Academy Award for Best Actor. The Oscar meant validation that he'd made it despite everything. The Dirty Dozen came in 1967, one of his most famous roles. Playing Major Reisman leading military convicts on a suicide mission. You believed him as the tough officer who'd seen combat, because he had. The authenticity wasn't manufactured. The Big Red One in 1980 pulled directly from his military background. Director Sam Fuller had served in World War II and wanted Marvin because he understood combat. The film didn't glamorize war, it showed combat as brutal and traumatic, exactly how Marvin described it. But talking publicly about Saipan almost never happened. Questions about the war got deflected or shut down. When he did address it, he pushed back hard against Hollywood's habit of making war look exciting. He understood the gap between movie violence and real violence in ways most actors couldn't. The Purple Heart sat in a drawer somewhere. For him, the war was private. The Battle of Saipan rippled past Marvin's personal story. This was the first time American forces grabbed territory Japan considered an actual homeland. Losing it meant the home islands were vulnerable. Prime Minister Tojo's entire cabinet resigned 9 days after the battle ended. The real impact was the airfields. By November 1944, B-29s were taking off from Saipan on bombing runs to Tokyo. Those raids devastated Japanese cities over the following months. All of that traced back to Saipan. The Marines who died taking that island made the bombing campaign possible. August 29, 1987, Tucson, Arizona. Lee Marvin died at 63 from a heart attack. His obituary mentioned his Oscar, his tough guy roles, his distinctive screen presence. Some mentioned he'd been a Marine. Fewer mentioned Saipan, specifically. But rewind to June 18, 1944, and he was a 20-year-old Marine fighting for his life. The bullet that hit him should have killed him. The wound should have put him in a wheelchair permanently. Every doctor said walking again was unlikely. Through 13 months of painful rehab and stubborn determination, he learned to walk again. Not perfectly, not without pain, but enough to build a life. Enough to stand on a film set for 12-hour days. His story mirrors thousands from that war. Young men who got wounded spent months recovering, then had to figure out how to live with what they'd experienced. The 4th Marine Division took over 10,000 casualties. Every number represented a person. Most survived their wounds, like Marvin. Many carried permanent disabilities. All carried memories that didn't fade. Marvin was lucky because he survived and built a life after, but he always carried the weight of Saipan. Directors noticed he had dark periods, times when he'd drink heavily or withdraw. Survivor's guilt is real. Why did you live when others didn't? People close to him said he carried the memory of men he'd trained with, fought alongside, men whose names most people never learned. That's what Saipan meant to Marvin. Not a historical event. A day when most of his friends died and he barely survived, and then he spent the rest of his life trying to make that survival mean something.